Common Standing Committee on Fisheries and Oceans. This meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to Standing Order of June 23, 2022. Before we proceed, I would like to make a few comments for the benefit of witnesses and members. Please wait until I recognise you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. Interpretation for those on Zoom, you have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either floor, English or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. Please address all comments through the chair. Finally, a reminder that screenshots or taking photos of your screen is not permitted. The proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and a motion adopted on June 20, 2022, the committee is resuming its study of the North Atlantic right whale. I would now like to welcome our first panel of witnesses, and I may get the name of the associations wrong, but I'll give it a try. Representing the Association des Crabiers Acadiens, we have Robert Hachet, General Manager. Representing Brazil Rock 3334 Lobster Association, we are joined by Daniel Fleck, Executive Director, and Sean Muse, Director and Captain. And representing the Coldwater Lobster Association, we have Heather Mulock, Executive Director. Thank you for taking time to appear today. You will each have up to 5 minutes for an opening statement, and I will invite Mr. Hachet to go first, please.
Okay, I'd like to know if you have access.
I have to ask the committee for something because Mr. Hachet has a PowerPoint that he wanted to put up on the screen. It's basically some diagrams and pictures to help him with his presentation and for us to understand what he's talking about, but it's only in one official language. It's not in both. It's in both. It has no. It is in both, but it hasn't passed linguistic review. So I need unanimous consent in order to allow that to take place. Not hearing any objections. Okay, Mr. Hachet, you can start when you're ready, please.
Okay.
So I'll take it for granted that people have before them the screenshots, and I will name them by number at least, identify them by number as we go through this presentation. So slide number 1, the first slide. Hello, my name is Robert Hachet, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Association des Crabiers Acadiens, 45 midshore fishers who benefit from 75% of the allocated catch for crab in New Brunswick. Slide number 2. The map you see on the screen represents fishing area 12. And this is the case, the many quadrilaterals that line the area each measure 14 by 21 kilometers. Inaudible for the interpreter. When an area closure is declared, DFO closes 9 quadrangles to create an exclusion zone of creating an exclusion zone of 42 by 63 kilometers. The distribution of traps on the bottom the pink dots represent the traps used in 2013, and the distribution of traps on the ocean floor show the preferred habitat for snow crab in Area 12. So you can see that there isn't crab throughout the entire Area 12. Slide number 3 now. The distribution of traps in 2021 is comparable to that in 2013. This is also the case for the 38 fisher members of our association in 2022. The 2022 data from these fishers was analyzed by Marcel Hébert, a biologist who studies the southern Gulf of St. Lawrence crab stock. Mr. Hébert is now part of our team after working for over 30 years on the snow crab in the science division at DFO in Moncton. And the next slides were produced by Mr. Hébert. Slide number 4 now. Here you can compare the evolution of area closures between 2021 and 22. Note how 2022 exclusion zone covered almost all of the preferred snow crab habitat. Sorry. Now let's look at the distribution of vertical cables in the water between May 1st and May 7th, May 22nd and 28th, and June 24th and 30th. Slide 6. One small blue circle represents 15 cables, a medium-sized circle 75 cables, and a large circle 150 cables. We see that during the 7 days prior to the first area closure, our fishers frequented the preferred crab habitats. Slide 7. Let's look at the map of May 28th, more specifically, showing the distribution of cables over the prior 7 days. Notice a large number of cables in the red striped quadrilaterals that close on May 28th and that our fishers will have to leave within 48 hours. Finally, at slide 8, June 30th, we see that fishing is now concentrated in 2 small sectors of Area 12 and that almost all of the preferred snow crab habitat has been excluded since at least mid-June. Does the preferred whale habitat coincide with these closure areas? Do the whales observed to justify the extent of closures and the exclusion of fishers from productive fishing grounds? To better understand this, let's look at the evolution of whale movements in Area 12 in 2022. So slide 9 allows us to analyze this. Mr. Hébert examined the evolution of closures in Area 12 between April 25th and May 7th, between May 14th and 28th, and between June 16th and 30th. Slide 10. So the first closure took place on May 7th at the entrance to Zone 12. Slide 11. This map shows the distribution of whales, those are the green dots, observed over the 15 days prior to May 28th. It can be seen that they're concentrating towards the center of the area where food is abundant. Note that the blue dot in the middle of the red striped quadrilateral does not represent a whale, but a position of an acoustic buoy that heard a whale singing somewhere within a radius of several kilometers. DFO will close 9 quadrangles surrounding this buoy in 48 hours, and our fishers will have to leave the area. Slide 12. On this map, we see that during the 15 days prior to June 30th, all the whales observed were already concentrated in the center of this area, in their preferred habitat, and that a very large number of quadrangles remained closed unnecessarily on the outskirts of that area, prohibiting access to fishers.
little delays in between.
Okay.
So we'll now go to Mr. Fleck and Mr. Muse and their joint statement, please, for 5 minutes or less.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, committee members. I wish to thank you for permitting me to appear before you to share my experiences regarding the North Atlantic right whale and how it relates to lobster fishing in southwestern Nova Scotia. Members are licensed to fish from Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, along the south shore to Digby, Nova Scotia, in lobster fishing areas in 33 and 34. Lobster fishing areas are commonly referred to as LFAs. The lobster fishery in LFAs 33 and 34 is conducted from near shore in shallow waters to a distance of 50 miles offshore at depths of greater than 100 fathoms or 600 feet in waters that experience the world's highest and strongest tides. Brazil Rock Lobster Association, in collaboration with staff from Acadia University, have been involved with and are still conducting at-sea testing of whale-safe gear, which is intended to reduce potential harm to whales. 4 vessels with staff from Acadia University have been experimenting with various apparatuses during the closed season and are scheduled to continue these trials within the open season. To date, none of the whale-safe gear has offered any measurable successes. In fact, the gear has demonstrated a risk to crew on board the fishing vessel when it fails. Captains configure their lobster traps in various manners, which typically range from individual traps on a buoy to trawls, which are groups of traps on a ground line that may contain up to 20 lobster traps with anchors at each end, yet each individual has their preferences. There are 1,662 commercial lobster boats in areas 33 and 34. The commercial season in both areas is the same. It runs from the last Monday in November to the following May 31st. This is a winter fishery conducted when whales are not present in these areas. The use of ropeless gear would not be practical in LFAs 33 and 34 because the fishery is conducted during Atlantic Standard Time when the sun sets at 4:30 in the afternoon and rises at 7:30 a.m. With long winter nights, the fishery is largely conducted during hours of darkness. With such limited visibility, with no ropes or buoys to indicate the locations of previously set gear by other captains, the trawls would be set over one another. This situation will make it difficult, if not impossible, to retrieve the tangled trawls, leading to the establishment of ghost gear, which are traps that are lost, remain unattended on the bottom, and ultimately kill lobsters of all ages and sizes, including egg-bearing females. The suggested use of vertical lines with breaking strength of 1,700 pounds or less is also impractical and inadvisable in such situations, as a rope would break under the strain of trying to retrieve the combined weights of entangled gear. In short, since whale safety is not a concern at this time of year because the whales are not here during that season when fisheries are conducted, to legislate a preventative measure for a situation that does not exist in an area only serves to place a tremendous financial burden upon small, independent, self-operating fishing enterprises and is not as required in this situation. I will defer the remaining time to Mr. Muse. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. I'd just like to thank you for having me. I've been involved in testing this whale safe gear throughout the summer in the most perfect conditions, which is not what we will be seeing this fall. And I can honestly say that I've been able to break everything that they have told me to test at well under the 1,700 pound breaking strength and with no consistency. Some of this may break, just numbers that we will give out in our statement when we write it, but it may have broke at 500 psi, and the next one may have broken at 1,100. So the same piece of equipment didn't break at the same strength, which was concerning. And my big concern to myself and my crew was the safety when it broke, when it came out of the water. And my crew is standing at the rail, some of this plastic would break and shatter. We didn't find it safe. Also, the real concern is the amount of ghost gear. It will be significant, this right, with all those trapped lobsters in them traps that can escape for quite some time. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. We'll now go to Ms. Mulock for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to speak before the Standing Committee on Fisheries and Oceans. My name is Heather Mullock, and I'm the Executive Director of Coldwater Lobster Association. Our association represents approximately 200 captains throughout Lobster Fishing Area 34, the largest LFA in Eastern Canada, with 979 license holders, the most licenses of any LFA. Since 2018, Coldwater Lobster Association has worked closely with DFO, ENGOs, and private companies to seek out mitigative measures to reduce the potential for marine mammal interactions. You'll notice that I'm using the term interactions rather than entanglements, and this is due to the fact that there have been no confirmed cases or documented evidence of North Atlantic right whales ever being entangled in lobster fishing gear in LFA 34. It is important to note that LFA 34 is a winter fishery. Our season is 6 months in duration and begins the last week in November, when North Atlantic right whales have already left Canadian waters and are well on their migratory path to warmer American waters. Coldwater Lobster Association has exhibited a strong commitment to science-based research and applied research testing, particularly with testing of whale-safe fishing gear. Our association has tested various innovations, including 2 versions of rope-on-demand systems, or ropeless gear, variations of weak rope, plastic inline weak links, hollow braided sleeves, braided weak links and loops, various splices and tucks, non-buoyant ground line, and we've even deployed passive acoustic hydrophones to monitor the presence or absence of baleen whales in our waters. Industry buy-in for any gear innovation is critical if solutions-based partnerships and trust are to continue. How the gear is constructed, its practical usage, and safety concerns, etc., must be taken into consideration throughout the evaluation process. Because of the unfavorable results from some of our at-sea gear trials, most of the whale-safe gear types have only amplified our grave concern for the safety of our crew and the risk of increased gear loss. LFA 34 is primarily a trawl-based fishery, with the average trawl between 15 and 18 pots per string. This alone significantly reduces the vertical lines in the water column. Aside from our gear trials, our ghost gear retrieval initiatives, mandatory rope marking and reporting of lost gear, fish harvesters in LFA 34 have adopted regulatory measures on their own accord, including a 3-to-1 ratio for their end lines, as well as a maximum rope diameter in our ground line. Most recently, the LFA 34 Advisory Committee put forward a proposal to DFO to further reduce the maximum ground line diameter to 9/16, a measure that, if adopted, would exceed what is currently enforced by NOAA. As my industry colleagues have pointed out in previous testimonies, every fishing area in Atlantic Canada is different. Lobster fishing areas and crab fishing areas fish in different depths, different bottom topographies, varying tide strength, and the sea state of some of these fisheries is considerably different due to the time of year the fishing activity takes place. What may work as an innovative solution in one area may not work in another area. LFA 34 presents unique challenges which cannot be overlooked. This uniqueness was evident when one of our collaborative engineering partners from the Gulf region came to Southwest Nova to accompany one of our captains during our at-sea trials. He saw firsthand the largest surface buoys used in our fishery, an LD4, not only pulled under the water's surface, but dragged by the strength of the tide, to which he replied, "Wow, I've never seen that happen before." To add to this, a representative from one of Canada's top rope manufacturers admittedly stated to us during our trials, "Even with extensive R&D, we likely won't be able to develop a low breaking strength rope for your region, given the tide strength, the hard bottom, and significant gear conflict." Our captains now face the underlying fear that innovative gear changes will be introduced in 2023 or 2024 with an unrealistic timeline for implementation. While I'm appreciative of the opportunity to speak to you today on this topic, I fear that we'll most likely meet again in the very near future, but this time to discuss the ever-increasing concern for lost fishing gear in Canadian waters, the unintended yet anticipated consequence from implementing gear changes. We must ensure that the fishery management measures put in place to protect North Atlantic right whales are appropriate for the fishing area in which they are being implemented and that they're not counterproductive. Introducing management measures that do not work will create economic hardship for thousands of harvesters, exponentially increasing the amount of gear lost annually, all while putting other species at risk with further entanglements. Thank you for your time today, and I welcome your questions.
We will now go to our questioning round, and we'll start with Mr. Perkins for 6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, witnesses, for attending today. My first question is for the three folks from Southwest Nova Scotia. I think for the sake of those watching and the members here, with Ms. Mullock mentioned the top.
Please turn off the chair's microphone, please.
I think just for the sake of knowledge, we're talking about the Bay of Fundy, the tides related to the Bay of Fundy and the highest tides in the world. And that's why the strength of the tides is so immense there that poses a challenge to any of these items. And Ms. Mullock, could you explain a little more about the proposal that you've made to DFO for a reduced line diameter and why that will be helpful?
Certainly. Thank you for the question. In 2020, the LFA 34 Advisory Committee, which is comprised of lobster license holders within LFA 34, along with DFO representatives, introduced into their fishing conditions a maximum diameter of their ground line. Now, in 2020, they put forward that the maximum diameter would be 5/8 inch, and that would be for their ground line as well as their end lines. Now, that was to meet what, to put in perspective, the Marine Mammal Protection Act, the comparability findings of the U.S. Now, that is what the American fishermen are using currently, is 5/8. So that's what's in their regulations. In just, I'd say about 2 months ago, the same LFA advisory went one step forward and put another proposal forth to DFO to increase that again and put a maximum diameter of 9/16 forward with an allowance of a small section of 5/8 inch rope near the anchor. This proposal was forwarded to DFO, and we await hopefully approval for that proposal. Thank you.
Mr. Fleck, you mentioned that none of the gear worked, the ropeless gear or the weak rope gear. The ropeless gear, do you have any idea of how much that ropeless gear costs?
Thank you for the question. Mr. Chair, I've been quoted figures for one end of the ropeless gear is approximately $4,000.
$4,000, and that would be for each one of the 400 traps that a license holder in 34 would have?
Yes, sir. That is a potential between that and the equipment required to auto coil that rope when it comes back on board to prepare it so it can be reset. That is correct.
And it didn't work either?
No, sir. Tremendous failure.
And the primary reason for that failure? And you were testing it in the summer or the winter during the actual season?
I've been involved in both in different times in the summer and into the fall, but not really in the winter season. And it was just impossible to get the gear to come back. It would not auto deploy when it was triggered. So we suspected that. So we had a traditional line on the other end so we could recover it when it would not deploy automatically when action to do so.
So, and Ms. Mullock's right in the sense that we've heard from officials that from Southwest Nova Scotia all the way around to the Gulf, no lobster gear has been found wrapped in the last 5 years on a single right whale, and only one instance of crab gear. Mr. Muse, when you said it was dangerous for your crew, could you explain a little more what happened?
Yes, as I was retrieving the end with the whale safe gear on it, if it was a plastic weak link or a nylon sleeve, when it comes out of the water and goes around the block, so the pulley that's over the side of the boat before it gets to the hauler, that's where the majority of the failures occurred. And the explosion of that plastic was right in where my crew would be standing. It would it would explode in their face. So we made sure that, I mean, they were far enough away from that. But that's just those that made it to surface. The majority of what I hauled didn't even make it to the surface. This past Monday, I was out in our offshore depths, 100 to 115 fathom, and I didn't retrieve any. We've tried 10 times and we didn't retrieve any of the gear. So fortunately, the other end didn't have any of those devices on, and I was able to retrieve the traps. So that would have been 100% failure, and the cost and the amount of ghost gear would be alarming.
What, and when you did this in the conditions that you were in, how do those conditions compare to what you would normally fish in, you know, January, February, March?
They were nothing like that. They were all, you know, ideal summer conditions with the biologist aboard. We tried to pick the days that they could do their work as well, but we won't see those conditions in the fall. That's another concern.
And the cost of $4,000 plus a trap versus for 400 traps, how does that work for you as a fisherman?
Well, with the margins we're looking at this fall, with the rising fuel costs and everything else, I don't want to lose a single trap.
Okay, thank you. I have a question for
Thank
Mr.
you,
Hatch.
Mr. Perkins. You got about 10 seconds left. I don't think you'll get a question in or an answer in that length of time, so I'll unfortunately cut you off there. We'll now go to Mr. Cormier for 6 minutes or less, please.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Ashe, my questions will be for you. To start with, thank you for the work that your association has been carrying out since 2017 to protect the right whale and to innovate fishing. Other witnesses before you have told us a lot about the closures, the seasonal and temporary. Many have told us that they found that they were likely excessive. As you've said, the whales are sometimes in a specific spot to feed, and areas around that are closed unnecessarily. Also, the types of tools that are used, the acoustic buoys or the flyovers. My first question for you about the seasonal and temporary, let's say, closures. Do you think there's a way to improve the use of these closures, and how would that be done? Quickly, because I've got other questions for you. Definitely there's a way to improve the way this is being used. Unfortunately, some of the slides showed that towards the end of my presentation that I wasn't able to get to. But look, at the beginning of the season, the whales cluster at the center of the Gulf. But during the migration period, the DFO, due to the measures now in place, applies the same measures throughout the entire area. So they close down areas where there really are no longer any whales. They haven't been there for a few weeks already. We could go in and fish. So when it comes to the periphery of the necessary closure zones, there are a number of spots that could be opened or not even closed at all, or close for only a short period. For example, when the whales are migrating from one part of the Gulf through and out, we could close, for 5 days, not 10, certainly not the entire season. Given that the whales don't stay there, they go into the center of the Gulf to feed. Then, leaving that area, they head down to the United States. According to you as well, we know that the whales can move around. They, of course, cluster where the food is. But when it comes to the acoustic buoys now, do you think that they could be better used? Could they be used to open some areas? They're used, of course, to decide to close some. Why not use them to decide to open areas, even the flyovers? Acoustic buoys, we think, shouldn't be used to close zones unless they're there to correct something or to support a flyover viewing of a whale, because the acoustic buoy hears any sound within 40 kilometers of the buoy. What does the DFO do? It closes everything down around the buoy. Worse than that, DFO closes based on sounds picked up by the acoustic buoy, but then doesn't reopen based on not hearing sounds at the acoustic buoy. If you want to use acoustic buoys, then at very least You should use it to hear the whales and in the right places, please, but also to decide you're not hearing whales. Many, even biologists, fear that the cables, which are low breaking strength, could cause more damage and leave more ghost gear in the water. The DFO seems to want to push ahead with this new approach a little too quickly due to certain measures undertaken in the United States, for example. But what do you think? Are we ready to go ahead with these no-loo approaches or not? No, this is really putting the cart before the horse. Contrary to the ropeless approach, DFO took time, carried out the right tests. We've been testing the low breaking strength links, the weak rope, this summer. We don't even have the results in, and the department is saying that all this should be used by next spring. Far too quick. And the amount of tension being put on these ropes, all tests show us that this will create problems, that this will lead to ghost gear being left strewn all over the bottom of the ocean. The other issue that Ms. Muse and Mr. Mullock brought up, I'm not sure they were referring to ropeless or weak rope, but in our area, Mr. Haché, the ropeless gear works quite well, if I'm not mistaken so far, the tests carried out. And here again, I'm speaking of the ropeless traps with, an electronic system, it works well enough. Yes, in Zone 12, it does work quite well. The Gulf of the St. Lawrence is a bit like, a big pond. Not too many currents, nothing too strong, the sort of current you see elsewhere with the tides and so on that the colleagues have been mentioning. Okay. And for us, in zones close to fishing, ropeless becomes a really useful tool. But it's not a recipe that can be used across the board. Some areas are good for some tools don't work in other areas. You really have to look at all the details and area by area in order not to bring about, very unfortunate situations. Quickly, Ms. Morissette and Ms. Brown told us in a prior committee that...
Your time is up. I'm sorry. It's about 4 seconds left, so I don't think you got time for a question or an answer. We'll now go to Madame Desbiens for 6 minutes or less, please.
Je vais lui laisser finir.
Very well. I'll let him finish off his question. Mr. Chair, I would like to support that, given that it was all going so well. Go ahead, Mr. Cormier. Put your question about Ms. Morissette, if I may, Mr. Chair. I'm so sorry. Thank you, though. Mr. Haché, Mr. Brown and Madame Morissette, and I believe that someone else in our prior panel as well, seem to be telling us that our measures undertaken in Canada since 2017, which have changed since, of course, were better and were even better than those in the USA. Do you agree? Oh, absolutely. I fully agree. I mean, it's clear. The message we get in the media, though, is rather fear-mongering, sending really the wrong message, but false information. Thank you. Madame Desbiens, I cede the floor to you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Mr. Haché. I will continue to put questions to you, sir, given that Ms. Morissette and other witnesses at our prior meeting told us about dynamic management of whale behavior and dynamic closure in consequence, using a number of tools. Do you think that's a good approach? Well, yes. It's a very good option. Unfortunately, the DFO, since the beginning of measures undertaken to protect the whales, has put a good deal of focus on protecting the whales without necessarily examining how to ensure coexistence of whales and license holders of fisheries. It's been 5 years now. We know more about how the right whales behave. We know that they move into the center of the Gulf and cluster there. We might adopt more dynamic measures that take into account the facts as we observe them. Just as the DFO right now is closing zones every time they see a whale, 48 hours and you got to be out of there, we could also use exactly that approach, a very flexible, rapid intervention approach in real time, to take even stronger measures where risks are high, but less strict when the risks are lower. Risks are lower when the whales are moving around on their own and heading into the center of the Gulf. Higher risks when they're clustered and actually moving among cables looking for food. We've also been told that there are fisheries, perhaps not in your region, but you can correct me if I'm wrong, that there are certain types of fisheries that are not carried out in deep water, but that they're victim of the same types of closures as other types of fisheries at midshore or, offshore areas. So the idea of well categorizing zones, some that might be higher risk or lower risk or more frequented by whales or less frequented, would that be a good idea? Yes, that is an idea, but that's already being done. For example, the lobster fishing areas, which aren't necessarily that deep, the measures there are different than those set for deeper areas. I'm sure some of my colleagues could tell you more about that, could tell you better than I, because they're lobster fishers. But yeah, that's already being done. It's one of the good alternatives that the DFO has adopted, demonstrating flexibility in terms of fathom depth of the fishery. So to summarize, there might be a zoning based on where the whales are. If we better understand their behavior, that's already something we're advancing on. What do you think of the more fragile cables, let's say the low break strength links in cables, and then the ghost gear? As I was saying earlier, low breaking strength cables and links are now being tested. We are testing them. We'll have to wait for real results before we can analyze, honestly, what they can and can't do. We already know from testing that these cables are probably completely inappropriate for pulling up large traps, crab traps, for example, or in areas where the sea conditions are such that pressure on the cables is really very high PSI. So, sure, we're testing. The DFO is funding testing. Let's wait for the results and let's base any future decisions on results.
For 6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for being here today. My first question was for Mr. Muse, I believe it's how it's pronounced. And I just wanted to comment that I was very concerned listening to you share the plastic exploding in fishers' faces as the traps are being pulled up, and also commenting on the amount of traps lost and that this is only the ones that were coming to the surface. It's all very problematic and concerning to me. And I'm wondering if you're seeing or hearing from others that are seeing an increased amount of plastic in the oceans or ghost gear found in the ocean as a result of what you're describing.
Well, not at this time, because we haven't implemented this weak rope or these weak links yet. But I can just say, like, every every piece of plastic that did make it to the surface that exploded into that block or the hauler fractured and has a potential to hurt one of my men. I think this would only get worse as the water cools off and that plastic becomes more brittle. I mean, keep in mind, I was hauling this type of gear last week in 60-degree water. As our winter fishery gets going, that water will drop to 38, 30 or below. I do believe that plastic will be even more compromised and more brittle. I'm just going by what I have tested. My colleagues have been testing all summer as well, and they had already determined that some of that was not going to make its way to my boat because of the safety. So we chose not to test some of the stuff already for danger to my crew.
Thank you, Mr. Muse. That is very concerning. I would agree, and the safety of your crew, and then, of course, as you're stating, on the increased plastic in our oceans, the impacts on our marine ecosystems. It's all very concerning. And I'm wondering if you're being provided with a mechanism to provide feedback on this, around your experience, around what you're seeing. Are you, do you know how you can, other than sharing with us today, is there a mechanism for you to be able to share your concerns?
Not myself. No, we have an association that's partnered within a university, and we'll be writing a report as soon as the testing is done. I do plan on testing these this weak rope and weak links during the season, and further get some more data from those trials.
Thank you. Do you have any suggestions at all, based on your experience, on how this whale-safe gear could be improved upon to make it more functional and safer for your crew?
Well, I've given it some thought throughout the summer, and everything that I've seen, I think we can't be hauling plastics and weak links like that. If we could develop a rope, and like Heather had spoken earlier, it's hard for a rope manufacturer to design a rope that is going to work in our LFA because of the time of year, the tides, the strength of, or the size of the sea. But in my opinion, that's the only way I see this moving forward. Ropeless gear will not work in our LFA because of the tides. And I do need a visual. We're 1,000 fishermen in LFA 34. I have to see my colleagues' traps, like the end of the trawl. So we mark our northern ends with a red balloon and our southern ends with a yellow balloon. That's information I need. I have to see that. And if I can't see that, then I'll be setting my traps over top of them. And the chance of not seeing or retrieving that trawl is great, or hurting someone. We try to avoid setting on top of people. So we need to see the traps.
Thank you. Do you think it's worthwhile? I know we had spoken and heard from witnesses in our previous study who were talking about the whale-safe gear adoption fund, and the importance of continuing that fund so that we can better understand what gear is working, how it's best working. What are your thoughts on that? How can we continue to better understand the implementation of whale-safe gear while also considering the impacts on people who are on the water trying to make a living?
Well, I think we should extend the fund or extend the timeline in which this will be implemented, because I think we've heard across the testimony that none of it has worked so far, and I'd hate to try something and risk all this ghost gear. Like when I say significant, I mean significant. The potential of losing 50% of your traps on the first day is a real possibility, and not to mention the thousands of pounds of trapped lobsters and the impact on the economy. This has to be done right.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Barron. We'll now go to Mr. Arnold for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses today. I think everyone involved wants to see the right whales protected and end these entanglements and other causes of death. I want to start out with Mr. Hache, if I could. Mr. Hache, has the department shared any information with your organization regarding real-time tracking of whales in order to reduce the closure times or area closures that are taking place?
You're on mute.
Yes. No, we haven't had much discussion on this because from what I understand, it's very difficult for to put some device on the whales that will allow that will stay on them and you can follow them. So that's one of the point. But we've been testing some buoys, intelligent buoys that if those buoys would get entangled in rope with a whale, the buoys will be sending real-time messages. So that would be an improvement in terms of mitigating the entanglement and allowing rescuers to go and liberate that whale.
If I understand that correctly, those buoys would be triggered if they were being towed by an entangled whale, and that would set off a signal. Is that correct, or could you elaborate further?
No, the buoys themselves communicate constantly, not constantly, but I don't know, maybe every 5 minutes or 15 minutes. Send a signal that the skipper gets on his phone, for instance, and he knows that if the buoy is moving more than, let's say, 300 feet from its mooring, then that there's something happening with that buoy. Either it's being pulled by a boat, either it's being pulled by a whale. So that's a tool that exists, but it is still at the testing stage, and it is a very expensive little ball, let's put it this way.
Thank you. I'll carry on with you, Mr. Hache. We've heard that protection measures will need to be permanent and ongoing. With that, what are the estimated value of reduced harvests between 2021 and 2022 with these larger closure zones? How much of that impact would be felt and how much of it would be ongoing if these are permanent measures that are put in place?
Hector.
Sorry. Oh. For between in 2022, and I can only speak for the midshore fleet because the midshore fleet is the main fleet with the highest allocation of quota, and it is the fleet that has problem catching its quota when there are very large, extensive closures. In 2022, there were about 35 midshore enterprises that left a snow crab in the water, maybe to the amount of about between 10 and 20% of their allocation. But this is something that varies from year to year, and we cannot sort of put a definite amount on it. But we've seen a problem with catching the quota.
I want to try and get one more quick question in for some of the others if I can. For Ms. Murlock and possibly Mr. Fleck, in looking at how the U.S. and Canada are addressing the issue of protecting right whales, can you give me any indication of what Canadian harvesters are being required to do that U.S. harvesters may not be required?
Dan?
Presently in LFAs 33 and 34, there are tracers that identify the rope that's unique to LFA 33 and 34. I know that is being done here. I am not sure, Mr. Chair, if that is being performed in the U.S. Thank you.
I can add a little bit to that as well. Now, again, I'm not sure if I can compare to what is being done in the US, but right now in LFA 34, which, as I mentioned, is the largest LFA, we have a maximum distance between our pots of 30 fathom, which is 180 feet. We have a 3.5 to 1 ratio. So the length of rope used to attach the fishing gear, so the anchor to the trap to the primary buoy, cannot exceed 3 to 1 ratio based on the depth you're fishing. We also have, what else am I missing? Probably the introduce the maximum distance, the 10 fathoms between the buoys, the primary buoys to the vertical line. Now, again, I'm not sure if I could compare that accurately to what the U.S. is doing, but those are some of the regulations that are within our fishing conditions at this moment.
Thank you, Mr. Arnold. We'll now close up this first hour with Mr. Kellaway for 5 minutes or less.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My first question is to Ms. Mulock, and my second question will be to each one of you, so it'll have to be a short answer, so we'll try to make that work. Ms. Mulock, I just saw a story, actually, from the Canadian press on the North Atlantic right whale, which shows the trajectory of the loss of the species. The North Atlantic right whale has slowed, but the trend is still worrisome. So with that in mind, what more can be done, do you think, to protect this endangered species? And how can we do it in a way, and we're hearing this a lot in the testimonies that we've had so far, how do we do it in a way where we're working with harvesters in ensuring their success?
Well, I think the Whale Safe Gear Fund that DFO announced last year is a good start. I mean, harvesters are the end users of these products, and we need to make sure that they're safe for everyone on the water. Some of the safety concerns we've seen during our trials are quite scary. We've had to pull some of the innovations very early on because there was a fear that the crew would be severely injured or unfortunately killed. Those are two of the innovations. Some of the captains actually had their crew hiding underneath or behind plastic fish boxes for additional protection. I think there's also, we really can't stress this enough, that every area is different. At least in LFA 34, for cold water, like I've listed everything we've tested, we've come up with one thing that we think may work, but there's still underlying issues. One of the weak ropes that we're using, which NOAA does not acknowledge or approve as a gear innovation because it doesn't consistently break between 1,700 pounds, this rope is leaded. And as that rope goes through the hauler, lead is shattered and going in every direction. Now, it's not just a safety concern, there's also an ecological concern. Here in Nova Scotia, if I'm recreational fishing, I'm not permitted to use a lead weight on my line, but yet we're going to introduce potentially a leaded rope. These fishing boats were covered in lead. If any of that lead gets in the live wells, which most of our boats in LFA 34 have live wells, that would kill their catch. So I think a continuous fund for whale safe gear is the way to go. Further monitoring as well. I mean, we have gliders that are out there in real time. Now, I'm not sure how accurate they are, but having other hydrophones is not useful because it's not giving us accurate data in real time. That data has to be extracted and then provided to data analysts.
Thank you.
So I think allowing harvesters to continue trying is the way we have to go forward.
Thank you for that, Ms. Mulock. The question I have, it'll be very quick. For each of you, and I know it's a short answer that you'll have to give, but when we're talking about North Atlantic right whale, we're talking about North Atlantic right whale and a lot of things, but in particular MMPA. So I wonder if each of you can speak to what it would mean if Canada didn't have access to the American market for your industry. And we can start with Ms. Mulock and go to Mr. Fleck and so forth.
I can't even think of a word. It would honestly cripple Atlantic Canada if we were excluded from snow crab and lobster in our U.S. market. I mean, they're still our primary importer, followed by China, and it's always great to diversify our markets, but we're not there yet. So this would have dire consequences to the entire Atlantic Canada.
Thank you, and I think we probably have a little time. Maybe just go around the horn, Mr. Fleck.
Mr. Chair, my short answer to that would be devastation. Thank you.
On to the next person. Oh, you're on mute, sir.
I'd just like to say the same. I don't want to imagine not having that American market.
And finally, Mr. Hache.
Yeah, we export over 70% of our crab to the States, so it's obvious that we need that market.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mr. Kellaway, and thank you to Mr. Hache, Mr. Fleck, Mr. Muse, and Ms. Mulock for your presentation here at committee today and sharing your knowledge with us. We're going to recess for a minute now to change out the panels. We'll be back very quickly, and we do have a small bit of committee business to do right at the end. So we'll recess for a couple of minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I'd like to welcome our second panel of witnesses representing the Maritime Fishermen's Union. We have with us Martin Mallet, Executive Director, and Mathieu Noël, Director of Opilio. Representing the Regroupement des Pêcheurs Professionnels du Sud de la Gaspé, we have Jean Côté, Scientific Director. Thank you for taking time to be with us today. You will each have up to 5 minutes for an opening statement, and I invite Mr. Mallet and Mr. Noël to begin with their joint statement, please, for 5 minutes or less.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And thank you to the committee members for allowing us the opportunity today to present. So my name is Martin Mallet. I'm the Executive Director at the MFU. And like you just mentioned, I am accompanied today by Mathieu Noel, who in recent years has been our lead on the right whales file, as well as being our snow crab fisheries coordinator. So I'll do my brief introduction in French. L'Union des
The Maritime Fishermen's Union represents over 1,300 inshore owner-operators in New Brunswick and Nova Scotia. Since its inception in 1977, the organization's mission has been to represent, promote, and defend the interests of maritime inshore fishers and their communities. With respect to the North Atlantic right whale, the narwhal, of the southern Gulf of St. Lawrence, our organization was present during the crisis that hit the crab and lobster fishing industry hard in 2017. That year, the snow crab industry witnessed significant right whale mortalities and entanglements. Measures to protect right whales since have been difficult for our sector when the first protection measures were put in place after little consultation with the industry. Fortunately, since then, all industry stakeholders, science, and DFO management have come together with a common goal of developing effective right whale protection measures while allowing for coexistence between whales and harvesters. It goes without saying that right whale protection measures have had a significant impact on how we conduct inshore fishing activities since 2018, particularly in the snow crab fishery, but also for the lobster fishery. However, generally speaking, these measures have had a positive effect on whale protection. The facts speak for themselves. As of a few years, no mortalities, no major entrapment of whales. We feel that the work must now focus on how to optimize these measures in order to reduce their impact on fishing operations. So here are our recommendations to succeed at that. First, extreme caution should be exercised in implementing additional protective measures so as not to introduce new risks for the whales, of course, but also for the industry. For example, the idea of adding low breaking strength links to lobster and crab fishing lines could create significant problems with lost gear and thus contribute to the problem of ghost fishing. As for the lobster fishery, it's important to consider that the dynamic coastal closure protocol appears to be working well. Adding similar but additional measures would not necessarily improve whale protection and might rather increase the risk of entanglement in lost gear. Second, it's important to consider that protective measures for whales only have an effect where there's real risk of interaction between the whales and fishers. Dr. Morisset's 2022 report highlights the critical period in crab fishery when the risk of interaction is highest, a period that generally begins in late May when whales arrive in large numbers in the Gulf. It's important to remember that when the measures slow down the crab fishery, which is quota-based, the fishing season is longer, and lengthening the fishing season increases the period of overlapping presence of fishing gear and clustering whales. Thus, if we want to improve our protection of this species, we must improve the management of the measures we're using to minimize their impact on the duration of the fishery, the progress of the fishery, especially at the beginning of the season. In this regard, some measures now in place have a negative impact on the fishery without offering any tangible protection for whales. The seasonal closure protocol, where fishing grounds are closed on a seasonal basis, even when whales may no longer be present in the area, for example. Second, acoustic buoy closures, where imprecise acoustic buoys are used to help close fishing grounds where whales, again, may not be present. Finally, Canada needs an international communication strategy about this issue. We've got a great story to tell about our efforts to favor coexistence between the fishing industry and right whales right here in Canada. Let's talk about it. Let's respond without delay to attacks from some NGOs, such as that a few weeks ago when Seafood Watch in the U.S. announced their demotion of our lobster fishery. Our international markets depend on protecting our good reputation and our work to coexist with whales. So thank you. and I will appreciate your questions.
You're on mute.
Voilà. Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ladies and gentlemen of the committee, thank you for having me. Thank you for your time. My name is Jean Côté. I'm Scientific Director at our association since 2010. I received my bachelor's and master's degrees in marine biology from Université Laval. Since 2017, I've been working on protecting the North Atlantic right whale.
Entre 20 brasses de profondeur.
Lobster boats in the Gaspé Peninsula fish in a zone between 20 fathoms deep and the edge of the beach. So far, they've never observed a right whale in these shallow depths. However, measures to protect the right whale and the impact of lobster fishing on this species are a fundamental issue for our organization. Since the United States has implemented its Marine Mammal Protection Act, which sets a country's status to export to the American market, Canada must implement right whale protection measures equivalent to those now used in the United States. One single right whale mortality caused by a fishing trap or its ropes could bring about the closure of markets with immediate consequences for fishers who would be unable to sell to processing plants that export mainly to the United States. My colleagues have already pointed this out. Despite the existing measures of protection that are superior to those used in the United States, the marking and identification of ropes, and the lack of whales in the fishing grounds of Gaspé lobster fishers, our members still don't know whether, in the event of a right whale death by a Canadian trap or ropes, access to American markets will be closed to them. Yet right whale protection measures implemented by Canada can have a significant socioeconomic impacts. For example, in 2018, our fishery applied the DFO's right whale protection measures planned for the snow crab fishery in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, causing the closure of the fishery, the lobster fishery in Gaspé area, for 67 of our members after a whale was present approximately 15 kilometers off the coast. The small group at Percé suffered a loss of approximately $9.5 million in economic benefits. The 67 fishers lost 3 weeks of income. These were the captains, and more than 100 seasonal crew members working for them were at risk of not completing the number of weeks they needed to access unemployment. Thanks to a rapid emergency level response from the province of Quebec and our regroupement, the harvesters' helpers were able to complete their weeks needed to live from one season to the next thanks to attending a vocational training program. However, none of the 67 principal fishers was compensated for loss of income. The following year, the DFO agreed to implement differential measures for, on the one hand, snow crab fishers, and on the other hand, Gaspé lobster fishers below a 30-fathom line. That was an improvement. Mr. Martin Mallet just pointed that out. Our group has since set up a program to monitor the possible presence of whales in our fishing zones within 20 fathoms. We are actively involved in research on fishing gear, the new low-breaking strength links, and so forth, and we're also working on better understanding the right whale with the specialist whom many have mentioned, Dr. Lynn Morissette. We've tested several mechanisms to release the whale should it be entangled. We've shown that no single solution meets the specific needs of every fishery. Our trials, though, have been hampered by the limited availability of equipment, such as specialized ropes with low breaking strength links, it's been very difficult to get them, or the breakage links in the numbers that we need them. There's still much work to be done to identify solutions that will reflect the reality of different fisheries using traps. We've seen some good examples of testing. But if the solutions currently envisaged are implemented by DFO for 2023, manufacturers and suppliers will not be able to provide the necessary equipment to all harvesters. And there's a need to test more solutions that meet the specifics in the field of individual fisheries. So we at the Regroupement des pêcheurs professionnels du Sud de la Gaspésie recommend that DFO create an income protection program for fishers and their helpers in the event of closures of their fisheries due to the presence of a right whale decided by DFO, or in the event of the closure of American markets following the death of a right whale caused by Canadian traps or ropes far from our fishery. We think that the DFO should assess the socioeconomic impact of implementing right whale protection measures and mitigate these impacts on the fishing sector. Third,
well over the 5-minute mark, I'm going to have to ask you to stop there so as we can get to the questioning.
Okay.
We'll start off with Mr. Small for 6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is for Monsieur Cote. Is any of the threat of market closures coming as a result of the recent USMCA negotiated by Minister Friedland? Are we being held as a hostage sort of here, do you think?
I would say yes. I would say we are an hostage in that. You're right.
Would you like to elaborate on that?
Well, I would say the one point is that it's all or nothing. It seems that we're all in the same basket, and the reality is different from one fishery to the other one, and everything seems to be depending on the USA deciding if all the fisheries will be good or not. But I must say at this point, we're not sure what they will do. So it's hard to argue more than that.
Are you satisfied with the department's response to the recent listing of lobster and crab from Atlantic Canada by the Aquarium Association? Are you satisfied?
I understand what you mean.
What's the name of the company? Sea Watch. Seafood Watch. Sorry. Are you happy with the minister's response?
I think they're completely wrong. Not happy at all. Oh well. Okay, with the minister's response. Okay, I'm sorry.
Has there been a response?
I think the minister did what he can. It's not enough. No, it's not enough yet. We have to be more clear. We are doing what states.
Maybe have him repeat that.
Mr. Cote, could you
my line must be bad.
Could you repeat that answer? You seem to be back. You froze up for a few seconds, and your part of your answer wasn't
I said there
audible.
was a response. I have a bad internet connection here. I was saying that DFO did answer, but I think the answer was not strong enough yet, and especially in the is going through media right now, and there's not enough information about the real facts that we are doing a lot.
You're froze up again, Mr. Cote. I might suggest for that answer, if you could provide it to the committee in writing, it would be great. And I would ask Mr. Swall maybe if he has questions for another witness. It seems you're having a bit of connection trouble there.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have a question for Mr. Mallet about how many pots would they have on? I know in the Maritimes sometimes it's referred to as a trawl. In Newfoundland we call it a fleet. How many pots would be coming up on one vertical rope? Is there multiple, or are they using single pots in his region?
In the U.S. or here in Canada?
In your area, in fishermen you represent.
In our areas, I mean, we represent fishermen in many areas in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, and it depends, I would say, on the LFA. But the standard would be between 6 pots per line. But there's two double lines, right? 2 lines on each end, one line on each end, I should say. So that's quite the maximum that we're seeing in some of our areas. But in some areas also we have some single traps per line as well.
For crab or lobster?
For instance, for lobster.
For lobster.
For snow crab, it's typically one pot per line.
So I know in Newfoundland and Labrador, it's completely in fleets with anywhere from 40 to 70. So the number of vertical lines are dramatically reduced. Would that be an option to use a Japanese-style crab pot to mitigate the risk to right whales? Because you're going to take a lot of vertical lines out of the water if you didn't fish with single pots.
These are the smaller snow crab pots that I think you're alluding to, and actually with our science team at the MFU, we've done some trials in the past few years. They're still ongoing, but we've tried to work with multiple pots per lines for the snow crab fishery. Although we have some limits in terms of how many we can use, because we use smaller boats than the midshore fleet. We use typically 45-foot lobster boats for our snow crab fishery. Mathieu, I don't know if you want something. I don't know if you want to add something to that, but that's basically where we're at.
No, that's a similar size boat that they use in Newfoundland and stack 300 pots on when they leave to go out. If you had to have a closure of a fishery for a couple of weeks because of right whale sightings, what would be the approximate cost in one of your areas?
For lobster, it would be disastrous if we are forced to take all of our traps out of the water for 2 weeks. Now, we've mentioned the shallow water protocol, which seems to be working very well. There's been a few instances where in the Magdalen Islands, where the shallow water protocol pushed fishermen closer to shore within 10 fathom, so they could continue fishing as normal. However, like my colleague here, Jean Cote mentioned, back in 2018, we did not have that protocol, and they had to live through such an event. In snow crab, we have to move around, as soon as these zones are closed, our fishermen are obligated within a few days to take all of their pots out of that area and move to an open area, which is in itself operationally extremely difficult. It increases the cost of operation probably twofold. And also, at the end of the day, there's risks to our fishermen safety at sea as well, by being forced sometimes to go out in very nasty seas to do these operations. So cost-wise, it's difficult to put a price on it, Mr. Small. But for 2 weeks, depending on the amount of fishermen, you can easily go into a few millions of dollars worth of lost revenues.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Small. And I did let you go over a small bit there because we had connection problems, so you wouldn't have the opportunity to complain about your time. We'll now go to Mr. Cormier for 6 minutes or less, please.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Thank you for being there. And Martin, if I may use your first name, Mr. Mallet, I will put my questions to you first. I think a lot of work has been done since 2017, given that this approach was pretty much unknown to the sector. So when we compare our measures to those of the USA, and many witnesses have spoken to this over the last few weeks, that our approach is far better than that used in the USA. That said, when it comes to the temporary seasonal closures, I think that, Martin, you do have some training in biology as well. Would it be possible to change those closures? Because indeed the whales move to feeding areas. Now that we know that better, in 2022, 5 years down the road, could we shift the way we use these measures to give everyone some breathing room, given that we know that the closures are difficult to live through, even though people say that, yes, it's been a good season, the quotas have been reached, it's incredible stress on everyone in the sector, including the communities, the processors, the harvesters. So, could we shift the way we use these closures without having ill effect on the whales? I'll begin the answer and then allow Mathieu to finish out. Yes, wearing my biologist hat, I confirm that since 2017, we've learned a good deal indeed about how the narwhals behave. We know that when they're in a feeding period, they tend to cluster in a specific place where they find food. A lot of food, and they cluster in large numbers, so we should close perhaps those areas. Mr. Hache mentioned, I believe, that when the whales are no longer moving, looking for food, that's one thing, but when they are moving out of those areas, then perhaps we should be setting closures there. Would you like to add anything? Yes, the devil's in the details. We need to optimize the measures we now have to see what we can do that will improve section by section, quadrangle by quadrangle that's closed. The map shows that it's a very large gulf. There are many areas to watch, but productive fishing only occurs in a few of those areas. So I think there's a way to shift the measures to wind up with something far more efficient and effective. All right, about these measures, when it comes to these low breaking strength links, these low strength ropes, will we get somewhere with that? Or is it going to be a catastrophe across the line? You know, when you think of endangered species, it's a very good thing to be protecting these mammals, these whales, but now it looks like we're going to be bringing in measures that might, unfortunately, have an unexpected negative effect. Are we ready to use these, or should we be waiting? No, we're not ready to use this new material. Think of the limits, depth limits that we managed to bring in weeks ago. That went through a long process of evaluation by real users and so on and so forth. Right now, I think that the science needs to be pushed a little further. Let's not forget that the entire polemic about these breaking strength links and how good they are was based on a single study carried out in the United States. Even if you do read that study in depth, the material used, the protocol used, well, at least it seems to me, doesn't fully support the conclusions reached by the study. So why 1,700-pound breaking strength? As a maximum, what we find is that one of the reasons why the ropes of lesser strength are on the dead whales is that fishers use, regularly at least, ropes that are lower breaking strength. So we've got to look at all the details and examine the real facts before we decide, A, whether these new ropes are safe for the harvesters, and two, that we're not going to be unintentionally creating an ecological disaster with the ghost gear, perhaps harming even more sea life or even whales. Now, Mr. Cote, I think you understood my question about the Canada-USA, the USMCA, basically. But really, we depend so much on our U.S. market. With all of this, the Marine Mammal Protection Act and the measures that the USA are trying to impose on us, basically, over and above, what they used to require, what should we tell them? What can we tell them? to explain what we're doing? Are we speaking up enough, saying this is what we're doing, here's why we're doing this and that? How can we protect that market? I think that on the communication front, we need a full-time strategist on this and a full-time strategy undertaking as soon as there's any attack on the Canadian sector, crab or lobster. We need a team ready to respond immediately using facts. As I said in my opening statement, we've got a really good story to tell about Canada, everything that Canada has been doing. If we look at the results over the last few years since 2017, which was such a catastrophic year for the North Atlantic right whale, but we've done so much since then. We've really worked on this. We need to speak up about it.
ABM for 6 minutes or less, please.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you to all our witnesses for their very relevant sharing with us here today. Mr. Cote, unfortunately, he has had difficulty with his internet line and he wasn't able to finish telling us what his recommendations are. So if he doesn't have a better link now, I will simply share that for him. There was, of course, creating a revenue protection measure as a way to protect against breakdown of the fisheries. There was this studying the impacts on fishers and on the fisheries of the use of the measures we have to protect the whale. There was also ensuring that we apply measures that take into account the specific geographical and other characteristics of individual fisheries, and ensuring that we don't use the new types of ropes, fishing gear, until research shows that it really will work and that we understand all the ins and outs of using it and enough material is available on the market for all harvesters. So perhaps those who are well connected and who can pick up on all this, could you tell us whether at the DFO, this was my question earlier, Mr. Cormier, about communications, could we recommend something like this? So the DFO takes more into account, they're taking a lot of resources to develop these protection measures, and they've got a very technical way of going about it. But are there enough socioeconomic experts there to tell us about the effects of all this on communities, on fisheries, on the economy of the region? Could we ask DFO to put more emphasis on the socioeconomic impacts of their measures? Is that a possible recommendation? Is that relevant? Yes, indeed. I think we've reached a point. Oops, I have an echo in my microphone. Can you hear me? Very well. All right, good. Yes, this might be one of the next steps. Focus on the socioeconomic repercussions of applying all these measures since 2017-2018 on our various fisheries. That could also underscore the importance of the sacrifices that this sector, the fishery sector, has had to absorb as it tries to coexist with the whales. At the DFO, there is a subsection of socioeconomic studies, but I don't think they resource it much. So this might be an opportunity for the committee to ask DFO to resource that sector further so they could give us better information to look over what we're doing here and uphold our approach here on the international stage. So a communication plan, a real one, to improve our ranking, really, in the United States and our view among some groups that tend to discredit our reputation, the reputation of harvesters here in Canada. Would this be a supplemental campaign, communication campaign, or would this be a way to support harvesters, much like in agriculture. I remember that there was an insurance policy for farmers, but there isn't such financial support for fishers to help them work through the stress that they're facing. So a revenue support in times of unexpected economic stress and an improved communication strategy to counter poor views and inaccurate views of Canada's fishing industry, would that help? Yes, both those measures would help. There were poor conditions for the lobster fisheries in 2018, and we might run into something like that again. This summer, there were a couple of cases where Île de la Madeleine harvesters, fishers had to gather closer to the coast, but should a whale turn up very close to the coast, then that entire fishery would be closed down for at least 2 weeks. And a whale might wind up in that zone, let's say if it were ill, or there are a number of reasons why that might happen. So a special support program for such cases, it would just be wonderful to have that in our back pocket. As for communications, I don't think we're working well on that front at all. We wait far too long to take action, to respond to ONGs, international ONGs attacks. We've got all the facts at our fingertips, all the information that could be included in a good communication plan, one that is ready to use quickly based on whatever scenario is thrown at us. For example, Seafood Watch. We waited far too long, a couple of weeks even, before responding to their criticisms. The DFO took so long, unfortunately. Compared, for example, to the Canada Lobster Council that was already publishing the facts in the media, not to attack the USA per se or anyone down there, but to defend us.
Ms. Barron, for 6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses. My first question is for Mr. Mallet, and this might be a bit of a bigger question, but I'm trying to understand clearly, based on the testimony that we're receiving, how to best put together recommendations based on this testimony to go to the government once this study is concluding. And one thing that I've been hearing quite a bit around the measures being taken to protect the North Atlantic right whale is having processes in place that are both responsive and versatile while also specific and clear. And there seems to be sometimes a bit of contrasting descriptors of how we would like to see these measures taken moving forward. And I was just wondering if you could clarify your thoughts on how do we best move forward. What are fishers on the water needing to be able to, be successful in the work that they're doing, important work that they're doing, while also ensuring that we are protecting the North Atlantic right whale and our marine ecosystems?
A great question. I think that when we started putting measures in place in 2018, we started with a sledgehammer approach to basically kill a fly. Now, year after year, we've been trying to optimize our measures to try to refine them so that as we move forward, we continue protecting the right whales as best we can. And I mean, like I've mentioned before, I mean, we've done a great job at that in the last few years. But also by refining through knowledge and through science and collaborative science with the industry and fishermen and DFO, find tailored approaches and sometimes area-specific approaches to mitigating risk for right whales. And I think that we have a bunch of solutions that are being proposed year after year, as has been mentioned to this committee, I think in the last few presentations and days. Every few months, there's an advisory group that sits down and talks about potential IDs and on things that don't work and things that work better. But also as we move forward, I think new technologies may appear that may be of interest to do some work on in terms of studying these new approaches. But again, we need to take our time with every new protection measure, and this is currently the case with the weak ropes. We are lacking too much information at this point to have it forced down on industry without having potentially a catastrophic effect on the ecosystem.
Thank you very much. Are you receiving or hearing any, how do you provide this feedback outside of talking to us today and sharing with us what you're seeing? Are there any mechanisms for you to be able to provide feedback around what you've been
Mathieu, do you want
experiencing?
to answer that one?
Yeah, there is technical working group which regroups the different people working in the industry, so the mechanisms are there for people in the industry to share the work they're doing on different measures and all that stuff, and share ideas on where we could go. But it's the challenge is always like, if we want to improve everything, it's not like the different zones, the different areas has different challenge, and we need certainly to be flexible on the measures. And basically the what needs to be done is to make sure that we protect the whales where they actually are. And just as an example, like the weak links measure that is proposed by the FO, we try to implement that in the lobster fishery in New Brunswick, where there actually isn't any whale that has been seen. Like, there's been no whale seen inside the 20 fathom line in New Brunswick, but we are still trying to put measures on for that fishery. So basically, we're not resolving anything. The whales are not there, so we're trying to put measures there, extra layers to protect an animal that is not there. So that's I think that's the focus we should put is to make sure that we protect the whales where they actually are.
Thank you. Just building off what you're saying, have you been seeing any increases of plastic in the waters or experiencing any safety issues with fishers on the water as a result of the gear being used in the attempt to minimize impacts on on whales, North Atlantic right whale?
Well, not yet, as they are only in the testing phase right now.
I think I'm going to quickly try. I don't believe Mr. Cote has the internet capacity to answer the question, but I was wondering if you might be able to share a little bit more with us, perhaps in writing, because I think I'm going to run out of time anyways, around the socioeconomic impacts that he was speaking to.
Yes, I'll do.
Great. Perhaps if you can build off what you were talking about before around the socioeconomic impacts, and how do you think that we could, perhaps the top thing that you think we could do better to ensure that we are considering the economic impacts of our decisions?
Thank you, Ms. Barron. We'll now go to Mr. Bragdon for 5 minutes or less.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses, and some of you, good to see you again. It's been a little while, and it's good to see you here back on Fisheries Committee. I wanted to start with, and perhaps I'll start with Mr. Cote, and the other witnesses can confirm this, but you mentioned, Mr. Cote, there in response to my colleague's question, I thought it was quite telling in regards to the USMCA, that being one of the key factors in why we're where we're at right now, the failure of negotiation as it related to the interest of the harvesters, and making sure that the concerns of the harvesters and the organization's responsibilities that you folks represent to ensure that their voices are heard in these things. I just wanted to ask you if you were ever consulted, or if the harvesters that you know of were consulted as it related to the NAFTA, the new NAFTA, USMCA negotiations, as it pertained to how this may potentially affect your industries. Go ahead, Mr. Cote.
I'm so sorry. I missed half of the question.
Okay.
I'm very sorry.
No problem. I was just in regards to Mr. Cote, as it related to the USMCA portion that you said, obviously, we're dealing with the consequences of that failed negotiation as it relates to the harvesters and its impact that negotiation is having now as it pertains to the issue that we're dealing with here at this committee today. Can you speak to whether or not your organizations and you or other organizations you're aware of were brought into the consultation process, where your voice is heard at the table during that negotiation?
I'm not sure if I understand well. You want to know if we were involved in those initial negotiations, and my answer would be no. We were just put in front of the decision that were negotiated much higher than us, and we just have to live with the consequences right now.
And those consequences are having pretty major impact from what we're seeing. And Mr. Millet, did you want to add comment to that as it relates to USMCA? Mr. Mal?
No, I think the USMNPA is a U.S. Initiative only, and is being imposed on all countries except the U.S.
Yeah, so this is having devastating consequences here. And I wanted to see, because we know the financial implications of this and some of these regulatory changes that's being put onto the industry and to the harvesters here, and as we just heard testimony, some of these zones have not had a sighting of a right whale ever that we're aware of or on record. But the cost and the potential cost of this to our harvesters is significant. Would you like to comment on that as well?
Just to go a little bit further, then I think that what the USMNPA protocol brings us into now, and it's going to be online, I think in 2023, is that there's going to be a constant threat, kind of a Damocles sword on the top of our head, with regards to all of our fisheries across Canada, with regards to any potential issues that we may have in terms of interactions with all kinds of marine mammals. So it could be an issue on the West Coast as much as on the East Coast here. Okay. And it just so happens that the new USMNPA threat started appearing for us here in Canada back in 2017, 2018, when at the same time we had this serious interaction event in 2017 with right whales here in the Gulf, in Canada.
Seems like there's two sets of regulations, one for the U.S. and one for Canada, for sure. It seems, as far as enforcement, does that, it would appear?
Yeah, but I mean, for sure, I mean, if you look at the comparative data between the way we are handling the right whales issue here in Canada compared to how it's going right now in the U.S. with regards to the situation with the lobster fishery down there. The industry in the U.S. and NOAA are looking at us actually as we speak for examples of how they could go about maybe decreasing their potential dangers for their whales down there.
Yes, and just wanted to ask this. In your estimation, have the harvesters in your area been adequately consulted before the government's decision to move to weaken ropes and other measures that they're suggesting here? Do you feel like there's been adequate consultation with the harvesters?
I think with the weak rope discussion is a discussion that started a few years ago. We feel like we are part of a conversation, part of a consultation process. But I mean, we'll see when things pan down to the actual decision at some point in terms of if we are imposed these measures or not. Again, we should never be imposed any measures at this point in time. If you look at all the good work we've done in the last few years and the recent impacts that it's had on the survivability of right whales here in Canada, before imposing anything else, we should seriously consider what we've done already and maybe just focus on optimizing what we're doing now.
Thank you, Mr. Bragdon. You're going way over, and I'll let you away with that because you're new. Mr. Morrissey, for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate your commendation.
Welcome back.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just for a clarification, because there's been a number of trade agreements and treaties that have been thrown around in the conversation. The U.S., Mexico, Canada trade agreement negotiated by Minister Freeland had no negative impact on the Canadian seafood industry. If anybody appearing as witness has verification that it did, I would like if you would submit it to the committee. We're referring then at the same time introducing the U.S. government's Marine Mammal Protection Act, which they brought in at the same time, which they will use against any country. In fact, the trading agreement that this government signed with the European Union reduced duties significantly on Canadian seafood exported there, increasing the price to fishers. So there's been a number interchanged in the testimony, and it appears we're confusing two different sets of, one is a trade agreement, one is an act by the U.S. government, totally covering their own area. So if anybody witness has documentation contrary to that, I would like for them to submit it to the committee. I want to go back because the testimony given has been consistent in all the witnesses that have appeared. One is that we could not. Any trade retaliation by the Americans or closing of the border would be devastating to the East Coast crab and lobster fishery. So we're all in agreement that that fishers must take all measures to protect the North Atlantic whale. But there's been criticism of some of the measures being put forward by DFO, but I have heard very little in solutions being offered concretely. So I would like witnesses to comment. There's been one comment was made, we should optimize the measures we now have, and I believe, Martin, you may have made reference to that. How could we optimize measures we now have that would enhance the availability of the fishing industry to pursue lobster and crab, but still protect the whale? And then another comment was made, I'm not sure who, that we have to provide more solutions. What more solutions could the industry provide to this committee that could work its way into recommendations? Starting with you, Mr. Mallet.
I'll give part of the answer and then I'll pass it to my colleague, Mathieu. But basically, I'll give you an example, Mr. Morrissey. There's no better risk mitigation measure than not having any lobster traps or snow crab traps in the water when whales are around. And we know that our fishing seasons, for instance, for lobster and the closeness to shore really helps us. I mean, 99.999% of the time not being in the way of any whales. Now for snow crab, the idea is to try to focus or increase the intensity of our fishery before whales appear. And any whale mitigation measures that are in the way of us finishing that fishery as earlier as possible right now is actually increasing, to my knowledge anyways, the risk to right whales. So Mathieu, I don't know if you want to add to what I just said.
Yeah, maybe on the fine-tuning point of view, like we have seasonal closures, which actually when two whales are observed in the same area in a certain amount of time, they will close until November. So they'll go through the season and close the area for the full year. And a lot of times there's no whale seen like a week after the last sight. There's no whales there. And we still keep those areas closed for the full season, even though there's no whales. So we're slowing down the fishery and actually not protecting the whales. So those kind of optimization that can be done to help.
I'll just add to that. For example, I mean, we have the capacity within our snow crab industry to finish most of our quota in about 6 weeks. And by imposing these closures, we're extending the season actually by 1 or 2 weeks in general. And this is from experience in the last few years. So there's a way to tweak it a little bit. I think in the next few weeks and months, we're going to have these conversations with DFO, but there needs to be this openness to modify these protocols and optimize them with what fishers are seeing as a potential solution.
Thank you, Mr. Morrissey. That's going to clue up our witness presentation for today. I want to say a big thank you to Mr. Mallet, Mr. Noel, and of course Mr. Cote for sharing their knowledge with us here today at committee. And I'm sure it'll help when the report finally gets written. I'm going to allow the witnesses to sign off, and we got a small bit of committee business to do, so we won't even go out of the public probably to do it. It'll take too long to get back in camera. So we'll just, like I say, we'll allow the witnesses to sign off, and then we'll deal with some committee business, a very small issue.
Thanks for the time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for the time. Sorry for the problem. Turn it there.
No problem.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Mr. Cormier.
We stay on this link, right? On this Zoom link,
yes,
right?
stay on this Zoom
perfect.
link. This is only going to take a couple of minutes, but I wanted to make sure we did have 5 minutes to get it done and over with. I believe, Mr. Perkins, you have something to say?
I always have something to say.
Yeah, it's just a matter of somebody listens, right?
That's absolutely right. Mr. Chair, as I've taken on another shadow minister job.
Mr. Chair, turn off your microphone.
I'm now doing double duties on 2 committees. I would like to vacate the vice chair position of FOPO and propose and nominate MP Mel Arnold for the role.
For that, I don't know how we'll ever get by without you as vice chair, but I'm sure we'll struggle through it as best we can. So there's a nomination on the floor, of course, for Mr. Arnold to be vice chair, seconded by Mr. Bragdon. Is there any dissent in that? Hold back your thoughts. Hold back your thoughts.
Each convincing us to support him? We want to hear it.
I'll accept the nomination and pledge to live up to the performance of Mr. Perkins and beyond.
Well, you set the bar.
Oh, you've set the bar very low,
Yeah.
Mel. You can do better than that. You can do much better, Mel.
Yeah. No, I think Mr. Perkins probably set the bar low.
Mr.
So
Morrissey.
it's going to be easy.
Oh, I did.
Okay, so congratulations, Mr. Arnold has been elected vice chair. Look forward to working with you. And that'll conclude our meeting for today. I want to say thank you to our clerks, analysts, and of course our great translation team that keeps us informed as to what's been said in one language or the other all at the same time. So again, meeting adjourned. See you on Thursday.